everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, May 1st, 2025. Can you believe it? It's already May. All right, just as a reminder, we do not have a vid chat tomorrow. We had one this Monday that was plagued with all sorts of technical problems. I don't know if it was on the network or my computer. I'm looking into trying to fix that and do some other household chores and repairs, so please keep me in your thoughts. Anyway, the Nefarium has been busy. There's two stories out of communist China, and I'm going to read sections of both of them. And this is a case of you tell me. You tell me if these stories are related. In my deepest bones, I get the feeling that somehow they are related. The second story in particular, I think you're going to find very interesting. I've been watching China closely the past few weeks, especially since this trade war seems to have heated up between Mr. Trump and Mr. Xi. And I had to ask myself, why did Mr. Trump pick now as a time to escalate this tariff situation with communist China? And I think maybe today's stories also have something to do with that. But anyway, let's get to the stories. The first story is titled, Residents Say Sudden Deaths Are Increasing in China. This is a story that appeared just a couple of days ago. It was submitted by Alex Wu, and there were contributions by Liu Fa, Fang Xiao, and Xiao Ming. I hope I'm not entirely butchering the Mandarin. I simply am not familiar with Mandarin pronunciation, so apologies out there to those of you who do speak it. But the story is very interesting, and I want to read about 4 excerpts. It's not a very long article, but I want to read about 4 excerpts from this story. Quote, a resident of Dalian City in northeast China's Liaoning province said that based on his observation, the recent death rate is apparently higher than the death rate during the period from December of 22 to early 2023, when the Chinese Communist Party lifted all COVID-19 pandemic control measures after nearly 3 years of draconian restrictions and lockdowns, accompanied by a massive wave of COVID-19 infections and deaths across the country. Wang, who declined to provide his full name out of safety concerns, told the Epoch Times on April 13th that many people in their 20s to 50s have suddenly died. At least 2 of his relatives have died, he said. Now let me stop before I go any further. It's significant to me that these deaths appear more or less concentrated, at least as far as the beginning of this article is concerned, in northeastern China. That is to say, if they're being accurate here, that is to say within Manchuria. And if that's the case, I don't know exactly where the Liaoning province is, but I would suspect it's either close to what used to be Manchuria or actually in it. And if that's the case, you're talking about the old Qing area of China and not the Han population that constitutes the predominant majority of the Politburo of the Chinese Communist Party. These are things that we always have to keep in mind. So could this be an indicator of something else going on behind the scenes? Well, possibly. I don't know. But the second article will get into those speculations, so just tuck that in the back of your mind. So let's continue in this article. Chao of Huadong City in northeast China's Jilin province, who didn't provide his full name out of safety concerns, also told the Epoch Times that many young and middle-aged people whom he knew have died one after another. He said on April 2nd, a friend of his in Jiangning in eastern China's Shandong province died without any warning signs. He went to bed at night and his body was cold the next morning. He was only 53 years old, Chao said. Now, this is where the article gets interesting, because now it mentions something that other people have noticed and have actually submitted videos to on YouTube, and I'll get to that in just a minute, but listen to this. Sue said hardly any people are left in small towns and rural areas, and residents have been wondering, where have all the people gone? 10 to 20 years ago, there were people everywhere, but now no one knows where they have gone, he said. Only a few elderly people are still in the villages. In recent months, video footage shot by Chinese residents and circulating on social media show many seemingly abandoned towns and villages across the country and empty streets in big cities, with people questioning China's real population in 2025. Now, that's true, because I just got done with a blog that raised the issue of what exactly is really China's population. And one of the things that article and the article that it's based on notes is that many of the large cities in communist China simply appear to be bereft of the crowds of people that were once famous for those cities. And if you go on YouTube and look at a bunch of videos, people are taking videos of these massive international airports inside of China, including at a couple of points, I think even the airport in Shanghai, that you would normally expect to be busy and bustling with people coming and going on international flights. And this huge airport is almost and completely empty. And that includes the duty-free shops. So people are either disappearing for whatever reason inside of communist China, and there's nothing being said, and people are noticing it. And now we get this story that it may be related to the COVID plan scamdemic. So we have one final paragraph from this article to read. Chow said he believes that the sudden deaths are related to the Chinese-made COVID-19 vaccine. He said many people's blood pressure, including his own, soared after the vaccination despite not having a medical history of the condition. Ever since, Chow has been taking blood pressure medications daily, he said, adding that he takes imported antihypertensive drugs because domestically made ones are not effective. So there's the story, missing people, and they're blaming the COVID plan scamdemic vaccines. All right? Now let's turn to another story. This, I think, it may be deeply related to the one that we've just heard. This story is titled, "Do China's Recent Military Purges Spell Trouble for Xi Jinping?" Now, this story, if you've been following it, emerged about 3 weeks ago, although it's a story that's been developing for the past few months, but has really gotten underway in the last, I'd say, the last 3 to 4 weeks, because there have been several top Chinese generals and defense officials that have been suddenly either dismissed or placed under house arrest, and something is clearly going on in the upper echelons of the Chinese military and the Chinese Communist Party. And I want to share this article, read a few paragraphs from this BBC article, which I think is pretty well summarizing the various speculations as to what's going on out there, and then I'll give you my own take. So we'll begin at the beginning of this article. Quote, "The officials' disappearances could be viewed as a sign of instability in Mr. Xi's leadership or a show of strength. Those are the two basic alternatives. They were trusted and favored by Xi Jinping. Now they seem to be vanishing. In recent months, the disappearances of several high-ranking Chinese officials have sparked intense speculation over whether Mr. Xi is embarking on a purge, particularly of those linked to the military. The latest person who appears to have fallen from grace is Defense Minister Li Shangfu, who has not been seen in public for some weeks now. While his absence was not seen as unusual at first, scrutiny intensified when a top U.S. diplomat pointed it out. A Reuters report said that General Li, who used to oversee arms procurement for the People's Liberation Army, was being investigated over military equipment purchases. And I'm skipping a couple paragraphs here to read one very significant diagnosis or interpretation of the situation. Quote, the main theory is that authorities are cracking down on corruption in the People's Liberation Army. Now, skipping a few paragraphs, we get these statements. Quote, General Lee's disappearance echoes that of Foreign Minister Qin Jiang, whose removal in July also caused speculation to reach a fever pitch. This week, the Wall Street Journal reported Mr. Qin was being investigated over an alleged extramarital affair that resulted in a child born in the United States. Having an affair is not disqualifying in elite Communist Party circles, but having one with someone who may be suspected of having foreign intelligence ties and producing a child holding the passport of your key geopolitical rival, if not enemy, may now be, said noted China analyst Bill Bishop. There is also speculation that Mr. Xi is acting under internal party pressure to clean out the stables as China struggles with a slowing post-COVID economy and soaring youth unemployment. Under China's political system, Mr. Xi is not only China's president, but the top leader of the military. Now, let me stop there and say that this is the view that I am tending to as of this moment, but I'll get back to that at the end of the article. Let me continue. Quote, viewed one way, the disappearances are a sign of instability in Mr. Xi's leadership. Observers have homed in on the fact that General Lee and Mr. Qin, who were not just ministers, but also occupied more elevated positions as state counselors, were favored by Mr. Xi. Their sudden downfalls could therefore be seen as a lack of judgment by the Chinese president. If one sees the disappearances as a political purge, then the fact that he had to enact one so soon after consolidating power at the party Congress last year, where he successfully neutralized potential rival factions and stacked key committees with his allies, is a bad look. He also targeted the armed forces and by 2017 had removed more than 100 senior officers. At that time, the state news agency Xinhua said in an article that the figure, quote, far exceeded the number of generals killed in wars to create the new China, unquote. Now here we get to the final two paragraphs, and then I'll give you my take, at least as of this moment. It may change, of course. Here's the final two conclusion paragraphs that I want to stress. Quote, years of systematically rooting out those who have fallen out of his favor and packing top posts with his followers could mean that Mr. Xi has surrounded himself with yes-men. The risk of groupthink is the real instability of Mr. Xi's leadership, as it could adversely affect China's national security and foreign policy, noted Dr. Char. The disappearances, in fact, have happened during a tense period in the Taiwan Strait, with China sending more warships and military jets there in recent weeks. Now, here's my take on what's going on. I'm viewing this like some Chinese watchers, many of them Chinese themselves, who have their own YouTube channels. But I'm viewing these things as indicative of profound instabilities within the communist government of Mr. Xi. And there are three areas of instability that I think we need to concentrate on. The first of all is the demographic collapse that appears to be underway inside of China. Now, this was a story that began to be noticed about 3 to 3.5 years ago by China watchers that have their own channels on YouTube. And they've pointed out that the demographic collapse, that China's population is getting older and it's not replacing itself with younger people, spells a real disaster, looming economic disaster for the Chinese Communist government. And in fact, it's that demographic collapse that forced the Chinese government to renege and reverse its one child per family policy, because they're simply not replacing their population. The other situation, of course, is the economic difficulties that not only the COVID plan scamdemic have brought on to Communist China, but now the new tariff war that they have with Mr. Trump. Because what's happening there is, of course, that all of a sudden those booming factories in China are not producing anything, and therefore people are not spending anything. So their consumer economy is being hit really hard. I would imagine probably much harder than the American economy by these trade wars. And then finally we have the military. And this is the most interesting to me, because if Mr. Xi is conducting a purge inside of China behind the story of COVID plan scamdemic problems, then we need to remember what happened when Stalin conducted a purge of his military. That purge during the 30s profoundly weakened the officer corps of the Red Army, so that when the Nazis invaded in June of 1941, the Soviet military was, if you know anything about the opening weeks of that campaign, just performed colossally poorly. And within a matter of weeks, about 60% of the operational capability of the Red Army had been completely liquidated. That's why that war was so long and so bitter. And a lot of it was Stalin's fault. He got rid of some of the best and most capable officers within the Soviet Russian army. And I suspect that if this is a purge on the part of Mr. Xi, that it's going to have its own national security repercussions. So in other words, if you look at all of these things as something that Mr. Xi is doing, then it's a sign of massive instability within his government. And when you add all three together, he's only increasing the national security risk to his own country by these policies. However, I tend to the view that this is some sort of internal opposition, because if we look at those three areas, two of the policies, especially the policy of the economy, especially with regard to the way they handled the COVID plan scamdemic, were Mr. Xi's policies. So in other words, he's the one left holding the bag. He's the one responsible for what's happening now in terms of policy. And when officers of his own appointment have suddenly been either put under house arrest or disappeared from the scenes when they used to be quite public and visible, this suggests to me that there's some sort of internal combat going on within the Politburo of the Chinese Communist Party, and we may be seeing Mr. Xi's opponents making a comeback. That's my read for now, because I simply have too much difficulty believing that Mr. Xi would purge people that he himself promoted only a few months earlier. And the simple reason why is because that simply looks very bad. And it's a staple of Oriental culture that you try to save face. You don't exhibit these sorts of public contradictions, because that simply is a way of dishonoring yourself. So I have difficulty of believing that Mr. Xi would be doing these things unless he's under some sort of internal pressure. And if he's under internal pressure to be doing them, then that means he's losing his grip on power. Now, the final thing I want to point out is that many of these disappearances occurred while Mr. Xi was recently on his trip to Malaysia. In other words, he was out of the country and then this happened. And that, to me, is a telltale sign that something is going on inside of Communist China. And these two stories may indeed be related. So time will tell, everybody, but that's it for today's news and views from the Nefarium. Don't forget, we do not have a vid chat tomorrow. The next vid chat will be a week from tomorrow, and that will be our afternoon vid chat. Cross your fingers, folks, that we don't have any more of these technical issues. So that's it. Bye-bye. God bless, and we'll see you on the flip side.